ya el 10º episodio de Librísimo. Síguenos en YouTube e iVoox, suscríbete, deja tus me gusta y comentarios. Es un honor recibir hoy a Djèlí Clark, que nos va a presentar Los asesinos de la cola del gato sin vida, traducido por Raúl García Campos para Obscura. Se trata de una novela de aventuras trepidante, ligera pero intensa, llena de magia, que devorarán tanto los fans de la fantasía como los lectores de los géneros realistas. Djèlí Clark es un autor reconocido por novelas como El Señor de los Jinn, galardonada con los premios Nebula y Locus, así como las novelas cortas La maldición del tranvía 015, Ring Shout y Los tambores del dios negro. Os dejo a continuación con nuestra conversación. Today with Phenderson Djèlí Clark, for everybody out there. He's coming today to talk about his new release in Spanish. It's coming up with Obscura, with translation of Raúl García Campos, and the name in Spanish is Los asesinos de la cola del gato sin vida. But we're going to talk about it, the Dead Call Tale Assassins, because that's the name in English. So welcome, Phenderson.
Hello. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Thank you again for making the time to be with us. And we normally start with the beginning, which is the title. Why did you decide to title the book The Dead Cat Tale Assassins? Such an unusual name.
It is. It is. I think I chose it because it was unusual. I think the idea of the story and the title arrived at the same time, and I knew that was going to be the title. And I wasn't going to budge. And, you know, my editors were a little wary. They were like, let's think about changing the title. And I was like, no, got to keep the title. People will pick up the book just by seeing it because they'll just want to know, what does that mean? And I actually make a joke in the story where the main character jokes that the name is ridiculous.
And I read in one of your interviews that it was kind of like a game that you have with a pal of yours to make silly names.
Yeah, we tried to see... We would try to we used to imagine we would have movies and we'd have like the silliest type of titles. And we used to do it with rock bands.
Okay.
Or garage bands, which were pretty popular in the 90s. And my friend said, I want to create a band called Greg Ate His Grandmother. And the t-shirt would just be a dinosaur. Okay. And because we were just making fun of the fact that some of these rock bands would have these absurd names, and so like indie little rock bands, and so we would play around with that, and so I think maybe that had an influence. The Dead Cat Tale Assassins could be an indie rock band. I could see that, and an all-girl indie rock band called the Dead Cat Tale Assassins.
I also wanted to mention, I think we will talk about that a little bit later, about the fantastic dialogues that you have. Very funny, very, very cool.
Yeah.
And
with a name like The Dead Cat Tale Assassins, the book can't be that serious.
Yes. But it's difficult. It's very difficult to do humor, to do it well. It's not that easy. So we will come back to that. I wanted to ask you also, this is something that I will also ask everybody that comes, if you remember where and when did this idea for this novel start in your head?
I wish I could. I know that I had the idea at least a year or two before I wrote it, but I didn't have the full knowledge of it. I had certain scenes, and I had a good idea of what I wanted it to be about, and I knew it was going to be absurd, and it was going to be funny, and so when I started writing it, it flowed pretty quickly. It was partly because it's a full secondary world, so it's not our world. And so I do a lot less research. I don't have to figure out, how long is a city block in 1920 or something like that. I can just write. And so, yeah, the idea came to me. And I guess we can discuss later. A lot of people, you may know this. There are 3 other stories I've written that are in the same world that are published. And
Yes.
so, in part, I'd already had those worlds. And so it was kind of returning to that mind state to do this story as a novella.
I was going to ask you, one of the things I had in the list to come to was about how you decide the names and the places of the characters, of the setting. Specifically, I wanted to start with Talabisi. Where is Talabisi?
Talabisi, well, this is a secondary world, right? So Talabisi is not our world. It's a complete secondary fantasy world I just made up. But as I always talk in workshops, since we only have our world, all the fantasy worlds we create tend to pull from that, right? And so, you read enough fantasy and you're well aware that too much of it is set in some version of England. And so it's good to see diverse fantasy today set in other parts of Europe, set in, in other parts, other continents, Asia, Africa, Middle East, and what have you, even Mesoamerica. And so when I started thinking of Talabisi, however, this secondary world, I wanted people to ask exactly what you did. Where is this? Because it doesn't fit anything. It doesn't fit exactly a place in Europe. It doesn't fit a place in Africa or the Middle East. It just seems like a hodgepodge. And that's what it is. I based Talabisi on medieval East African Swahili city-states. But I mixed that with Renaissance Venice. And I mixed that with a bit of 16th, 17th century London. And I also mixed it with Angkor Wat in Cambodia, right? The temples of Angkor Wat. And so there's a little piece of that everywhere. And then the culture is like, there's a little bit of New Orleans Mardi Gras. There's a lot of Caribbean Carnival in it. There's mummery from London. It's just this mix. There are some Native American influences. And so I purposely wanted to create this cultural milieu, this, world where people wouldn't be able to identify, oh, well, this feels African or this feels Middle Eastern. It feels like everything. Yeah.
I had the feeling you spoke about the Mardi Gras. I got that reference, of course, and because I know some of the other stories that you've written and some are connected to that. But I was thinking also about not only Mardi Gras, but cosplaying and Sailor Moon and K-pop.
Yes, there's the cosplaying with
the K-pop
the dressing
thing,
up.
It's kind of like my own, I'm in that
where
phase
everyone
right
dresses
now.
up as the Clockwork King, right? And so I'm pulling on even old carnivals in Venice, and my family's from the Caribbean, and there are some things there that are directly Caribbean, like there's a scene with burning canes that's very popular in certain Caribbean carnivals. There's also one that comes from a place that my father's side of the line, they're from a small little island called Carriacou, which is off Grenada in the Eastern Caribbean. And they practice this interesting, they're a former British colony, first French, first Spanish, then French, then British. And one of the traditions that they interestingly passed down is a thing known as Shakespeare Mass. And what Shakespeare Mass is during Carnival, people dress in these interesting, really colorful dresses, and they have like whips, and they have like big hats, and they also have books of Shakespeare. And when they encounter each other, they begin reciting from off their memory. They start reciting Shakespeare, and you can imagine Shakespeare being recited in a Caribbean accent, but perfectly, right? They know it, and they challenge somebody else. How well is your knowledge of Shakespeare? And the other person does it, and depending on who wins, the whips, they will actually whip each other's legs.
Oh, wow.
As part of the tradition. And I always found Shakespeare Mass such a interesting and kind of odd tradition that these people of African descent who had been formerly enslaved and formerly colonized by the British have adapted this British understanding to their own culture. And so in Talabisi, I kind of mimic this with the literature challenges that people have with each other, right? Where they will recite poetry and, and it can get violent and it's challenging. And you walk up on someone and you challenge them to tell you a good story or you tell you a good poetry. And so,
It's almost
yeah,
like
so
a
anyway,
battle.
I pull from all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, like a freestyle battle of,
Yeah, like a freestyle. It's like this, right? It's a freestyle battle in a sense, right? It's like an old school doing so, but with Shakespeare. And in this one, it's with the culture of, as people read the book, what happens in Talabese, and especially the story of the Clockwork King, which I very purposely, this was also an experimental book for me. I slow rolled the story so that you don't really realize what is going on with the Clockwork King until I think like the last quarter. You're like, oh, but I purposely wanted to know, can I do that with the story? Can I slow roll the world building? And so I don't explain the most important part until, I don't want to give it away for spoilers, but Scene on the Beach, where you finally get like, oh, okay, yeah.
And the word Talabisi, is it based on something in particular or just you made it up?
Something in my head.
Okay.
I'm pretty certain. When I think back of it, I know that I read enough fantasies. And, fantasies love a good, like Kal or something. And that's like the base word. And then so I'm sure I somehow landed on Tal. And then that became like the base word. Like I think I also used another word, pole. And that becomes the base word for like the leaders there, right? Or the matriarchs, the patriarchs of the city all start with a pole this and pole. So it's like a title. And so to me, Tal probably is like a title that means land or something. And then I don't know where I got a BC from, but it does have a very kind of East African Swahili feel. And so I'm thinking since the Swahili city-states are one of the first things that I base this society on, even though I added in all these other things, I'm guessing in my head, there's some Swahili similarity that I pulled from, yeah.
It made me think of Avenetia or something like this. It was like this type of... And then we're going to talk about Evin. I don't know how you pronounce her name.
Yeah, Evin.
Evin?
Though, as you saw, one of her people, he has an accent. He pronounced it Avin.
Exactly. The part of the accent, to me, it took me a while. I had to read it a few times until I realized, just don't overthink it. Just say the words and you will understand.
When he says Avin and Evin, and she's like, I don't like that one. He says it that way. Avin, yeah. So it's just Avin, yeah.
And I love that, again, we have a female protagonist. And this is not the first time. In many of your books, in fact, most of the ones I've read, the main character is female. And they have agency by themselves. That's so refreshing and so interesting. And in this case, she's not very young. It's, middle-aged, I would say, or... Not extremely young, although there's another character that plays that part, and I don't want to go into spoilers. We have Sky, but I wanted to know if for somebody who doesn't know anything about this story, who is Avin?
Yes, Avin is an assassin. She works for a guild in this fantasy city who call themselves the Dead Cattail Assassins. They also take on the personifications of different cats as you see them in their own weird ways. She's also undead, but not a zombie, as she'll let you know. That's racist. There's a big difference.
Yes.
She is undead, and the whole point is that sometime in her life she died. Before she did so, she gave over her soul and her body to this matron of assassins, this temple of assassins called this goddess called Errol. And basically, when you do so, you get resurrected and you got a contract. You got to live out your contract as an undead person. And as I have in here, Errol is both the matron of assassins, is also a goddess of culinary delights.
Yes. Anything related to knives.
Right. And so you could come back and end up being a cook or a waiter, or in her case, you come back as an assassin. But the trick is, the thing that goes with this is that you have no idea of your past life. Your entire past life is wiped. Your memory is wiped. You arrive as this new person with all of these skills. You have no idea if you had these skills before. You have no idea who you were. And they even make certain to resurrect you a long while after you've died just to make sure that you don't run into family or friends who might trigger something in you, right? And so Aveen has this contract where she just comes back as this undead assassin, and she doesn't know who she is, who she was. And so she's developed her own personality. She likes reading, comic books, different things. And, she's a heroine, but she's also a bit of an anti-heroine because she takes people's lives, right? She kills people, and she's rather flippant about it. And so, yeah, that's Aveen. It's a character who, you're like, oh my goodness, should I like this person? Because it's a murderer.
Yeah.
But you see that she does have her own moral code, regardless. And she also has, of course, rules that she has to follow.
Yeah, there's an endless list of rules, and also an almost endless list of titles of those comic books that she loves. Because this, as you mentioned before, it's also about, as you were saying, this Shakespeare kind of like battles that you've seen in your childhood in the home of one of your parents. But this is also something that she refers to all the time, to the characters in those
comic book,
in those comic books.
She loves it,
They're almost like a reference, like a model for her, because maybe she does not remember any other role models.
Yeah, she doesn't have anything. And
exactly.
so imagine it's like she's been reborn as a full adult who has these skills. She has no idea. Could she fight before? Did she know how to use these knives and different things? No idea, but she does now. And it's almost like she's really not that old, right? It's only happened a few years ago. So she's like in other words, she's like an infant in this grown person's body with this mind, but she's trying to create this life for herself. And so one of those things is that she finds that she likes these comic books, which I based on like old Pulp Fiction books. And so they're comic books, but they're like comic books that you would read in the 1940s or 30s with like, the 100-headed monster or something like that. And she loves these things. And she's as a point of reference all the time. What is it? Seal the Maniac Hunter is one of her favorites.
Yeah. And I wanted to know if, because I also read in one of your previous interviews that you mentioned this was kind of like, if you had to put it into a short sentence, John Wick meeting dragons and
John Wick
dungeons.
meets Dungeons and Dragons, right? In some ways, it's an assassin, and there's magic, right? So imagine if John Wick also had magic and monsters. That's how it would be like,
Is there any part that was especially difficult to write, or what was the main challenge?
Yeah, let me think. I mean, it's like so much of this was fun. And so I never saw it as extremely difficult. I'm trying to think of a part that may have been, if anything, it wasn't so much hard as I had to slow myself down when I came to what I consider, again, everything that happens around the beach was really important. And so I had an entire different idea going into that I wanted to do, that I'd seen. And then while I'm writing it, I realized I wanted to do something else. And so a lot of that changed from what I had originally intended. And I liked it. And so I won't say it wasn't difficult, but it was one of the parts of the story that started going a different way than I'd first intended.
And I also, this is something that I like to ask everybody because I'm very interested in the craftsmanship of writing itself. So do you remember how many drafts did you went through, or roughly?
Well,
are you going?
This one, not many with this one.
Okay.
Interestingly, so I wrote this. I want to say I wrote this in a month. I sat down and just wrote it because I had the idea. So I wrote it in a month, and then as I'm writing, I tend to go back and do, when I save it, it's like 1A, 1B because I might have changed something a little, but I didn't change that much, and so I didn't have too many drafts. And then when it was done, I didn't really alter too much. Now, I did get I always listen to my editors normally, right? This was the one time when they were like, well, do you think you want to change the title? I was like, no. They were like, well, maybe the ending is a little. I said, no. I was like, the ending is dark and odd. And I even, got a really good friend of mine who's a writer as well. I'm not going to say their name, but they were like, the ending kind of threw me off and gave me shivers. I don't know if I like that or if you want to go there. And I was like, I do. Because this is like an irreverent story. I wouldn't have other characters maybe end the story the way it does, but I did. And so this is not something writers should do. I will say that in a great deal with this story, this is probably the one story where I told most of my people helping me edit, thanks, but no thanks. Which is different. Normally, I am very much you said that, let me go back and change that. This was one where I was like, no, I like the story the way it is. And so I did a lot of copy edits, but there weren't too many changes. I was just willing to see what people thought of it once it was out.
And I think you can see this through, you can feel it. You can feel this story is a story that you have so much fun. Not that writing your other stories wasn't fun, but this especially you can say, oh, he must be laughing writing this.
It's absurd. It's silly. Right?
So surreal sometimes.
And it's surreal. And people would ask me, like, I had someone ask me, said, I read your story. It was when the arc was out, and I'm wondering, were you talking about the issues of social justice and issues of race? I said, no, I was just writing a story.
Yeah.
They said, but the bad guy is rich. I said, that's not fun. That's not like groundbreaking. Bad guys being rich, Robin Hood and onward. That's normal. I said, so yeah, he's rich and powerful. I said the most political thing you can think about this story is that the cover features a dark-skinned black woman who you don't always see on the front of book covers. I said, but the story itself was written as fun. I want people to just sit down and just read it. Enjoy it for what it is. And if doesn't mean people won't come away, because I think everything is political in a way. Yes. And so, as you were saying, having a woman protagonist, even having her not being as young, she's not in her 20s, at least she's at least 30 something. And so just even that is a little different. And I'm sure there are other things in there that I'm not even thinking of. But I did not intentionally. This is not like a ring shout or like, the Black Dot's drums where I'm giving this a little bit of history or even, a Master of Jin universe where I'm doing this anti-colonial stuff. This is just a fun story. And if there's politics in it, it's mostly because I would say that for a long time, though that's changed now, at least growing up, a lot of the fantasy did not feature these kinds of diverse worlds and diverse settings. And that's the most political thing about it. But there's nothing inherently that I was trying to get across.
But I think that's also kind of like a political statement in the sense that you can have fun with...
you can't get away from it, right?
Right. I mean, you don't need to have a very... You can apply a very deep thinking into it or not. Just have fun. Yeah. But have fun with characters that I haven't seen growing up. All the characters were nothing like me, were all male mainly and white, really white, and did not...
a dwarf, an elf, and a ranger meet in a bar was literally meet in a tavern that looks like old England was literally how I grew up reading fantasy. And it was the only fantasy it was rare that I would see any other type of fantasy.
Yeah, but I didn't think about an elf being Asian or Arab or African. And then now we can see that more into the the pictures and, the TV shows. But back then when I was reading and I was, much younger, I never thought, and there were not many, if we're talking about Tolkien, there weren't that many women.
No,
mostly they were just... Exactly. Yeah. So I like that. And I also like the fact that she is not romantically involved with anybody like that we know, like the romance. It's not attached to her like normally.
No, it's not. There's somebody there's the doctor guy it's just, it's like it's just something they have their relationship. We don't know what it is. It might be purely physical. That's just it. But there's, it's
casual.
It's not the center of her world.
Exactly.
She's much more interested in her comic books, and her job is killing. And when they see each other, and that's about it.
And I like that.
I do like that Sky also, for reasons I don't want to go in, I guess I can say it here, right? The whole point of Sky is that, we can say that part. The main part of the book is that she's given this impossible job. Exactly. And the job is to kill this young girl who turns out to be her, right? A younger version of her. And so it is interesting how those two characters, though they're very different, they realize they have similar, in similar taste in this guy. Like they both, Sky is making googly eyes at him. Yes. And, she's like, what are you doing? It's like, what? And then she was like, oh, I like husky men. And she was like, yeah, I bet you do, because so do I. That's why. So yeah, that stuff was just fun to write. Like I said, like I had fun writing. I think I was writing the story and laughing as I'm writing it for the most part.
I think you can feel that when you're reading. It's at least
Yeah.
I was thinking he must have so much fun
And
writing
I
this.
got to also bring in things. I don't know if everybody caught this. For instance, if you caught this, like there are edgelords, and edgelords are. I don't know if this translates as well, but edgelords, at least I would say in the English speaking, especially in the U.S., are guys who you see them a lot online, and their idea is that they push things and they're very edgy and because they are transcend above things. So they'll say something very sexist, they'll make rape jokes, they'll say something racist, and if you call them on it, they'll say, "Oh no, no, what you're getting too you're too sensitive. I'm just pushing the edge, right?" And they even call themselves edgelords. So they say things edgy to get a lot of likes on a post or to trigger people. It's like clickbaity. And so in my story, I have edgelords, but I make them like these really obnoxious young men who like to dabble in magic that should be banned.
Yeah.
Right? And I use the term edgelords. And especially, I don't know, again, I don't know if it'll work in the translation, but especially for a lot of people in the US and English readers, I had a lot of readers like write me and they said, I died laughing when I saw
Yes.
that you these annoying young men edgelords, because
Yeah.
that's who they are. These personas that you see a lot of times online or as influencers or those kind of folks. Yeah.
I don't know how that will be translated into Spanish because I read the book in English because
Yeah.
it's still
But
there.
I'm sure you have them in Spanish
Yeah.
as
We,
well.
I can think of something, but it's more
Yeah.
like in the family setting. It's called
Yeah.
Your Brother-in-Law. It's like the obnoxious brother-in-law who says
Yeah, it's kind of
sexist
like that.
things always.
It's a similar. It's always a dude.
Yes, always. It's
Right.
called
In the U.S., the edgelords all kind of look alike. They have the neck beards, the
Yes.
little ponytail, and they think they've transcended everything, and
Yeah.
they can be very arrogant about their.
It's called cuñado in Spanish, and it's exactly that. You say, "Oh, you're making the comment is from a cuñado. You're doing this," and it's
Right.
they're obnoxious. They're just notorious
So
for being
anybody
obnoxious.
reading and they're wondering what's an edgelord if they're not familiar with that more very U.S. centric term, yeah, please
Yes.
apply that one. That's what's meant by that. Yeah.
You talk about a little bit. Do you normally use beta readers in your projects?
It depends. So, for instance, with something like with a Master of Jin, I definitely sought out a diversity reader, someone was actually Egyptian Canadian to give me some good background. I didn't really use a beta reader for something like Ring Shout, though I did talk to someone, a wonderful author, Eden Royce, about Gullah language, so I could get some of that down. But a lot of my books, I would say that my beta readers are like my editor and my agent now. This book was a little different. There were some complications, and so I had to go looking for outside readers, and I did end up getting two. I don't want to give their names. I can't remember if I put it in there because I don't. But two very well-known writers who I really like, and so they were able to give me a bit of feedback, and and even then it was like they didn't want to intrude too much, so they gave me some really basic things for the most part, but nothing really deep.
And can you share with us any current project that you're working on?
Sure. Well, right now, next week my middle grade book comes out, A Benny and the Kingdom of Gold, the second in that trilogy, and what I'm working on all the time now is the third in the trilogy, because it turns out when you're writing books for younger people, they grow. And so you have to hurry up and write the book before they outgrow it. And so that is pretty much consuming all of me right now. But when I'm done with that, I would love to return and finish up another novella that I've been working on for quite a while, in fact. It's kind of like a novella that I always go to when I finish something. So I've been working on it for years, but not normally. Like I only go back to it like I finished a Master of Jin. Let me play with this a bit. I'm finishing the Benny song, so let me go to this. And so I'm hoping once this trilogy is done, I want to finish it for good. And it's a story about it's a story set in 1930s Ethiopia after the invasion of Mussolini, fascist Italy. And it's basically the story about the main character is a heroine with metallic arms. And she goes off to Ethiopia to fight fascism, to fight Mussolini's troops. But there's also a supernatural element. So it gets kind of quirky. And so I've described it to people as Captain America meets Raiders of the Lost Ark, but set in Ethiopia in the 1930s.
It
She gets
sounds
to
really,
punch fascists, you know.
it
Who
sounds
doesn't like
really
that?
relevant right now.
Yeah, who knew? Even though this story is very, people are going to ask, were you influenced by the time? I was like, I started this story before I started A Dead Gin in Cairo.
Oh.
This is an old story that I kind of put to the back burner, but only picked up recently, like maybe a few years ago.
So would it be your very first idea for the novel?
I don't think it would be the first,
Okay.
but it was certainly up there with like a lot of the stuff people have read from me. I started this one before,
Okay.
right? I just never finished it. I keep coming back to it, and so I've told myself this summer you're going to finish it. But I need to get what I'm doing off my plate first before I can get to it.
And this is something, just to wrap up things, that I ask everybody at the end of the interview, and it's just two very short questions. The first one is, who would you like to see in Librissimo, if you could recommend someone? But it has to be alive.
Oh, someone in my book?
No, somebody in general, another author you would like to see
Oh.
here, sharing.
Oh, that I would like to see here?
Yeah.
Let's see. And I'm looking around to see if I can find books, but all my books are up here, so I can't even give you someone. Who do I think? Oh, I'm blanking. So somebody I would like to see you guys interview, whether it's translated book or not.
Yes,
Somebody
yeah.
that I would like to see you interview.
That you like, you
Alex
admire.
Jennings. Alex Jennings
Okay.
Alex Jennings would be great. He has a book that I'm blanking on the name. I'm looking around to see if I can see it up here, but I think I gave it to my wife, and she has it downstairs. But it's a book set in an interestingly magical New Orleans that's really fascinating. I think that I think that book would be great if it's ever translated. I don't know if it is. And yeah, I think you'd have a great interview with him.
I was going to ask you, the last question was going to be to recommend us a book, but I think you just did.
Yeah, if I can. I hate that I'm blanking on Alex Jennings' book. Let me look it up right now.
Okay.
Because I refuse to. I just blank when people ask me a question. It's called The Ballad of Perilous Graves.
Okay. So
The Ballad of Perilous Graves, yeah.
we're building this small library of recommendations from everybody who's coming along, and I think it will be very interesting and very colorful. And I forgot, I wanted to ask you about retro fantasy, and what do you feel about this concept when people think that your stories are immerse readers into this retro fantasy?
These kind of retro. I mean, I think especially when I use steampunk or even like the story I'm talking about, Coming Monk, it uses diesel punk. I think all of those things are inherently retro, right? And they're also fantastic because steam power is never able to do the things that we have in steampunk. Same with diesel power. And so, yeah, I think it is a type of retro, but I think it's also me looking at the past to answer questions about our present, right? Which is what to me the best fantasy and science fiction always does. Or at least I wouldn't say answer. Let me rephrase on that: answering questions, but getting us to ask questions about things in our present. I hope people, when they read books, even if they're set in the past in this fantastic settings at times, they can apply it and it causes them to think about things in modern day.
So would it be like reimagining the past in a way?
In some ways. I mean, certainly in many of these, like my alternate history books, certainly I'm playing around with reimagining the past. But I think steampunk has always done that. I think steampunk is almost inherently alternate history, whether it calls itself that. If you're creating a world where Steam technology now rises to this level that it never was, you are inherently doing fantasy, and you've inherently made an alternate world, and you're using this type of retro technology. And so people have called it before retrofuturism, because the technology, there are automatons and robots often in steampunk that we couldn't build today, right? And so people have called it retrofuturism, and I've sometimes said some of my works I think could fit as Afro-retrofuturism, right? Rather than Afrofuturism, but Afro-retrofuturism. But you're right, I think that fantasy element is in there as well. It is not just magical. I think you use steampunk technology, you automatically entering a type of fantasy because the science doesn't fit science, right? It's something else.
Well, thank you so much for giving us some time, some of your busy time, to answer a few questions for our
this was great.
Spanish readers. And I cannot recommend you enough the Dead Cat-tailed Assassin, Los Asesinos de la Cola del Gato sin Vida, because it's really fun. You're going to love it. It's super, I hate to say this, but it's a page turner, really. You go fast and you laugh so much, so you're gonna love it.
It is a fast-paced story, and I hope that people see it as exactly that, right? That it's supposed to be fast-paced.
Well, thank you so much again, and I hope to see you soon or sometime in the future with another of your books being translated into Spanish.
Yes, I think I'm supposed to be in Spain, in fact, again for another I think sometime in November.
Okay.
In Madrid, so.
Great. Well, I hope that then we can maybe see each other. And everybody, thank you so much for connecting to Librisimo. And you know where we are in YouTube and eBox. And just stay connected. Ciao.